So as promised, I'm going to give you guys my thoughts and analysis on this video of tonight's Tuesday Night War between NXT and AEW Dynamite. So tonight was a very different night from what we saw in 2019 or even a year ago, because WWE really stacked NXT, and NXT has also had a lot of momentum going into it. Now there's two things going on here. One is the fact that AEW is being preempted or whatever, moved to Tuesday because of the baseball playoffs tomorrow night. That's number one. Number two, NXT is currently shopping for a new TV deal, so they're going to try and boost the ratings of the show and boost the importance of NXT. Now, what was interesting about the shows tonight, both AEW and NXT, Tony Khan stacked AEW with a bunch of big matches, and he also promised segments with Christian and MJF, two guys who are maybe two out of the three best talkers in AEW, alongside, of course, Don Callis, who was also on the show. But what I found interesting is that when it comes to an in-ring perspective, when it comes to action, AEW's night tonight versus NXT was a better show. That being said, NXT was not a slouch, but I want to say this. The big analysis going into this, or coming out of it, is that WWE and AEW, although WWE did stack NXT, they definitely had a completely different perspective on what to do with this show in comparison to AEW. On AEW, you had a lot of big matches. You had everything that was going to be built up to be a special show. And they even had a 30-minute pre-show with a really good Eddie Kingston Minoru Suzuki match on YouTube. So that was a fun bonus. Plus they had, I think AEW had like a 15-minute overrun. NXT had about a 10-minute overrun. Now, AEW show, when it comes to the hardcore fans who like in-ring action, that's going to win. Like, it really comes down to what you're into. Now, if you want big stars and big moments, AEW had a phenomenal segment with MJF and Jay White and the Bullet Club Gold. Probably the best segment of the entire night as far as story goes. So AEW, surprisingly, did very well in the story department. It wasn't just good matches. NXT, however, Shawn Michaels Triple H had a totally different way of doing this. NXT's strategy was to load up the show with main roster stars and legends, but instead of just loading it up and giving them in-ring matches, that's not what we saw. Instead, we had, very cleverly and multiple times in the show, we had main roster talents interacting with NXT talents. Cody Rhodes and John Cena were in multiple segments on this show, along with Rhea Ripley, along with Dominic Mysterio, and Paul Heyman. These are the main roster stars that came to NXT to give the younger guys the rub. Seeing the end of the show with the Undertaker choke slamming Braun Breaker, that was done purely to bring back the lapsed wrestling fans who love the Undertaker and who haven't seen him in a long time. Remember, we have not seen Taker since Raw 30th in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania back in January. I was at that show. I flew to Philly for that show. So we haven't seen him since then. He has that awesome segment with Braun Breaker. We have Cena in there in Melo's corner. Cena brawl with Solo. The whole thing about this night was they wanted to use these already made stars to emphasize and inflate the star-powered NXT. So they had two totally different goals. NXT, I feel, was playing the long game. I think Tony wanted to, and AEW wanted to legitimately give the fans a great show, and they did. AEW Dynamite tonight was a great show. I feel like the last 3 weeks of AEW have been such a huge improvement. They're focusing on characters and story, and that's what really matters more than wrestling matches. We have documented proof of this. The matches are the payoff to the story and the character, and AEW focused on that. NXT focused on getting some of these younger talents that aren't on the main roster some screen time with the already made guys. So early on, AEW, well, first of all, I have some information for you, some behind the scenes notes. So I've learned that not only was AEW's show formatted differently and changed throughout the night, but Tony Khan stayed up late last night putting the show together. So originally, what I was told, again, is that the Powerhouse Hobbs Chris Jericho match was not supposed to happen until the second hour, but it was actually the third segment or the second match on the first hour. And that's interesting. So you could tell that stuff was being moved around. Originally, they were going to open the show with Jon Moxley and Rey Fenix, but Moxley was not cleared. We heard that on the pre-show. So instead, we got Orange Cassidy and Rey Fenix, and that was the 9 o'clock hour match. So it's just interesting how Tony Khan and AEW had to shift the deck around and adapt to follow NXT. But like I said, they did a phenomenal job. I'm going to give them credit. Y'all know I've been very critical of Tony Khan's booking, but the last 3 weeks have been really, really good TV. Not perfect, but really, really good TV, and AEW feels fun. Okay, so with Cody Rhodes coming out, the big announcement he had was that he was going to be the general manager for the night. And he announced not only the women's tournament, but also a male's tournament and the Dusty Classic, which we kind of knew. This, of course, would lead to the announcement of a Dragunov versus Dominic Mysterio match with LA Knight being the referee. So LA Knight, another insanely popular guy right now, got to be on television on NXT. So again, WWE's throwing everything at the wall here. AEW moved some things around. Instead of having Rey Fenix open the show, instead they had Bryan Danielson, the former Daniel Bryan, huge WWE star, against Swerve Strickland, another guy who was in NXT, a year and a half ago? Maybe 2 years ago? And a very beloved guy. I love Swerve and what he's doing now. So AEW opened with a really good, solid wrestling match. Probably the best match of the night overall, I would say. And Bryan and Shane Strickland killed it, bro. Swerve and Bryan are so good. And I love how Bryan won the match because, what's his name? Hangman interfered. But I love that Bryan was putting over Swerve subtly in the match because Swerve was able to counter and dodge a lot of Bryan's techniques. They had a lot of good wrestling. It was really, really good. Over on NXT, you had that opening segment. Now remember, both shows promised a 30-minute commercial-free portion. So the first half an hour of these shows had no commercials, and they were able to cram a lot in. We saw the arrival of John Cena. We saw, some backstage stuff. Now, what I think was the most surprising thing was the second match on AEW, which is Jericho versus Hobbs. AEW basically tried to do the Brock Lesnar John Cena match from 2014, but with Hobbs and Jericho. Hobbs was destroying this man. I know that Will Hobbs is a super humble guy in real life. I can only imagine how honored it must be for Jericho to do this for him. He recently joined up with Don Callis, beat up on Kenny Omega, and now they are legitimately positioning him as being the scariest monster in the company because Jericho was somewhat competitive, but Hobbs just kept killing him and killing him and killing him until he finally beat him, putting his knee over his head. That was crazy. Now, while that was going on over on NXT, you had the Irish pub street fight, which was wacky and over the top. You had like barrels and tables, and it was a lot of fun to watch, 6 guys just going crazy. But the Hobbs-Jericho match was probably more important for that storyline as well as for Will Hobbs. This was Powerhouse Hobbs' coming out party. You understand what I'm saying? He is now being positioned to get a major, 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 major push in AEW. And I like that right now we've got Swerve and Powerhouse Hobbs getting huge pushes. I see both of those guys as potential future world champions. If not in AEW, one of them may someday go back to WWE. So after that, they gave us Jay White and the Hangman, which is a pay-per-view level match. And while that was on, and I'm not going to go through every single segment, guys. I want to discuss the strategy. So while that was going on, Dragunov and Dominic were going at it for the NXT title, which is the co-main event. It was good. I would say Jay White and Hangman was probably a better match. These both were kind of co-main event matches going on against each other. I do find it interesting, though. To me, Dragunov is phenomenal. Like Dragunov, Braun Breaker, and Hayes, and Carmelo, these guys need to be on the main roster. Like, soon. I mean, like 2024, no later than that, they should be on Raw or SmackDown. Now, with that being said, Jay White and Hangman was a better match, but really the big treat was the post match with MJF, and he did a very long segment with Bullet Club Gold. Now, the thing about AEW is usually their wrestling is usually what they really focus on, and the talking stuff is more so the WWE style. But MJF and Jay White have this crazy chemistry. MJF wants his title back. Jay White stole it. they did this thing where Juice Robinson brought out a roll of quarters, which is supposed to be a throwback to the story that MJF told about how when he was young, he was bullied by people because he was Jewish and they threw quarters at him. And it's sad because right now, as you know, there's a lot of turmoil in Israel and Palestine. I don't want to get into that here in this video. I don't talk about these things on here, but it is kind of weird timing to bring this up, but it definitely was a story, and MJF was really pissed off, and so that story is great. You also had this weird segment where Adam Cole was kind of stuck with Roderick Strong, and his phone didn't have reception. I think even though those segments are fun, they're kind of getting stupid. Cole not having reception, maybe I missed something. Remember, I was watching both shows. I had 3 monitors here at home with my computer set up, so I had one streaming on one side, one streaming on the other, and I would mute it during the matches to listen to the promos or, try to figure things out. So if I get some things wrong, that's why. Just want to make sure you guys know that. So again, the strategy here, they were both thinking the same thing. Put on the big matches in the middle of the show. Cena was out there. Cena got a tremendous pop. I should mention that. I should have mentioned that earlier. And he still has that star power. Remember, man, Cena is a guy who now is far and away a mainstream star, thanks to stuff like The Peacemaker and Fast and Furious and whatnot. So, basically, after that, AEW, like I said, did the MJF segment. That segment was long. It had to be about 20 minutes, but it was good. It was really, really, really good stuff, and it felt really good. I think that segment might be the one segment on the show that may take viewers away from NXT. Not saying they're going to win that segment, but I think NXT will lose that segment only because it was really good stuff. Then WWE brought out Jade Cargill, former AEW talent. She met with Shawn Michaels. Then they had a segment. While this was going on, MJF and Bullet Club were still doing their long segment. They had a phenomenal back and forth promo. And then they showed like other talents in the back. The thing they kept doing is guys like Baron Corbin, Cena, like I said, Cody, they were little short segments interspersed throughout the show to get them over, to get the young talent over. So it really felt like a special episode of NXT for both companies, even Dynamite. So then they went to feature some of their women talent. On NXT, you had the Saraya match with Hikaru Shida, which actually I should mention earlier, Orange Cassidy did beat Rey Fenix to recapture the TNT title because Tony Khan gave him the shot when Moxley couldn't make it. And I think they did that. I don't believe that was the plan. I really don't. I think this is one of those, let's make it a memorable night. So you had not one, but 2 title changes because on AEW, you also had Hikaru Shida winning the women's title. Meanwhile, in NXT, you had the women's breakout tournament, which I feel like that the stakes on that are way, 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 way less than the ones in AEW. So the AEW segment worked. One thing that made me laugh in the show is Ruby came out dressed like a ninja, Ruby Riott, or Ruby Soho, and then Toni Storm came out, who was also being featured on the show, in her bra and panties, and I was screaming like, this is the Monday Night Wars now. When you've got women dressed like ninjas, like Luna Vachon did in WWF back in the day, and the bra and panties, like, okay, now we're really doing a time capsule of what wrestling was like in the late 90s. Guys, I had so much fun watching this with people in my Discord. We had like maybe 25 people in there. It was like in the watch party. I had such a good time with this. I'm not done yet, by the way. So they then moved on to, and I'm thinking, okay, where's Undertaker at? They haven't busted everything out yet. They had a segment with Heyman and Braun Breaker. They had Cena and Mello. They had Cody book some things for next week. Again, they just had these talents interacting with the younger guys. That was NXT's whole thing. So AEW, I thought we're going to have the Adam Copeland match right where the overrun started, the Edge match, but instead you had Christian come out first and cut this amazing promo where he kind of buried Edge for the way that Edge got breaks in WWE and he didn't. He buried Adam Copeland for trying to make the Judgment Day and having it not work. And Christian is such a great talker. He is so good. Also, there was a segment earlier in the show with Don Callis also. Some really good stuff from AEW. I was so surprised that I enjoyed their angles here as much as the wrestling. So Big round of applause for Tony Khan for really putting the best foot forward here. If every episode of AEW is like this one, which it can't be because it's a special night, but if it were, I would love the show every week. Just being real with you. Just being real with you. So Sheeta did regain the title. I mentioned that. Then over on NXT, we saw the on-screen, even though it was in a segment, debut of another former AEW talent, Brian Pillman Jr. So that was cool. Meanwhile, Don Callis did a great promo with Takeshita, and then MJF had a segment with the Acclaimed because I guess they're building up like the Acclaimed to be MJF's friends against the Bullet Club Gold. So then Edge came out. First Christian came out, then Edge. Christian cut that promo, and WWE started, if I remember correctly, guys, I could be wrong. WWE started Carmelo Hayes and Braun Breaker first, I think, but their overrun was ended before Edge's match. So Edge had a crazy match with Luchasaurus. Lots of storytelling here. Luchasaurus, the bigger, younger guy, Edge being the veteran, gave him a lot. Adam Copeland came to AEW to help these young guys out. And I feel like, in my opinion, it's only been one match, but I think Edge did more for Luchasaurus than CM Punk did for almost anybody during his run, with the exception of maybe Mox and MJF. I don't think Punk did that well with guys like Garcia or even Darby, right? I think Edge really gave Luchasaurus a lot. There was a spot in the match where Edge hit this spear where he ran on the apron and then jumped, like it was like a double jump, like in a Mario platforming game, and then jumped off the steps and then speared Luchasaurus. This is a really good match. Great first match for Edge. Meanwhile, on the other channel, Braun Breaker, Carmelo Hayes, they're killing it. Now, for AEW, though, the Adam Copeland Luchasaurus match had a lot of smoke and mirrors. You had weapons, you had Christian there laughing at ringside, Nick Wayne was involved, lots of interference. It really did feel like an Attitude Era main event. And that's why it was so good and so much fun. So, meanwhile, Braun Breaker and Carmelo Hayes, they're having their thing. Solo comes out to attack Cena, and Carmelo Hayes beat Braun Breaker. I think the AEW match was probably better out of these two, but they really did work hard. Again, man, Braun Breaker, Bronson Steiner, Rick Steiner's son, this guy has money written all over him. So, Cena's gone. He's brawling with Solo. Heyman was there being awesome. He gave Braun Breaker a great introduction at the beginning of the match. Then Braun Breaker makes the mistake of saying he's a badass. So guess what happened? The Undertaker finally showed up with the American Badass gimmick and music on the motorcycle, came to the ring, put him over. He said, you one day you're going to be a big deal, but that day ain't today. Taker hits him with the choke slam and cuts a promo. And at this point, they're kind of dragging. It felt like they were dragging the overrun along. But Tony Khan had said that earlier in the show that he got permission to have an even longer overrun. So AEW did go about 5-6 more minutes, give or take. I don't remember exactly. But what happened was Taker lays out Braun Breaker. So once again, NXT had legends interact and main roster guys interacting with the younger talent. AEW just gave us a good wrestling show. I do think that, in my personal opinion, you guys know I'm very unbiased. I don't do that tribalism bullshit where WWE's the best, AEW, whatever. I want them both to be good. Tonight, both shows were good. I think AEW may have slightly won. I really believe AEW may have won as far as not the ratings, what I think. I feel like NXT is probably going to win the ratings. We'll find out tomorrow. I could be wrong. Because remember, AEW's beat NXT a few times. More than a few times, right? But they just put too many big guys on there. Just too many. But I thought when it comes to what I enjoyed more, AEW had a better show. The promos were off the charts great. Christian, Callis, and MJF, and even Jay White are tremendous talkers. Lots of action. Swerve Strickland is a future star in this business. He's already a star, but I mean like top guy. I am so happy, guys. I had a great night, and I want AEW to keep getting better, and I want NXT to improve as well because they really are. So much fun. So much fun. Anyways, those are my thoughts. That's my analysis. Interesting how they would counter-program each other and what the strategies were. Ultimately, I know TK moved some stuff around. weird, but not that weird. It made sense. There was also, I should mention, there's also a Wardlow like squash match when he squashed the former Evan Bourne, Matt Sydal. Didn't really need to be on this show, to be honest. I'm not sure why they really did it. They featured a lot of bigger guys like Hobbs and Wardlow, which is probably going to be a match at some point, I would think. They already had a feud, what, last year or 2 years ago, whatever. But now Hobbs is really getting pushed with that Jericho win. So AEW was probably a better show. Not perfect. There were some flaws. There were some L's there, I think, especially with that Wardlow segment. But NXT was also a good show. So I had a great time, and I hope they do this again. I mean, they're going to do it once a year, but I wish they did it 4 times a year because it was a lot of fun. Anyways, take care, y'all. What did you think? What shows you like more? Let me know down below, and I'll talk to y'all later this week.